Sometimes the things people laugh at carry more weight than they'll ever know. Sometimes a woman's quiet dignity speaks louder than a whole town's mockery. In Sagebrush Gulch, they gathered for the spring auction like vultures to a carcass. When Bren Talmadge bid $10 on a broken storage box, the laughter shook the rafters. A mountain woman spending good money on worthless junk? That was entertainment enough for weeks. But Bren wasn't there for their approval. She came down from those hills with purpose carved into every line on her sun-weathered face. That box held something they'd forgotten. A name, a secret, a truth buried so deep the town built itself right over it. What happens when one woman decides the past won't stay buried? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains had been Bren Talmadge's home for 30 years, ever since she turned 28 and decided the world below held nothing but disappointment and noise. Her cabin sat at 7,200 feet, tucked into a grove of ponderosa pine, where the air stayed clean, and the only voices were the wind and the occasional elk bugling in autumn. She'd built most of it herself, cutting timber and hauling stones from the creek bed, her hands growing calloused and strong in a way that pleased her. There was honesty in physical work, in seeing a thing through from beginning to end, without compromise or committee. Her father had taught her that. Josiah Talmadge had been a surveyor, a man who understood the land in ways most people never would. He'd shown her how to read topography, how to find true north without a compass, how to measure distance by counting steps and feeling the earth beneath your boots. Those lessons had sustained her through 3 decades of solitude, through winters that could kill the unprepared and summers that baked the high country brown. She kept his old briarwood pipe on a shelf above her bed, the initials J.T. carved into the bowl by his own hand. Sometimes in the evening she'd hold it, turning it over in her fingers, trying to remember the sound of his voice. The memories had faded, like old photographs left too long in sunlight. But the feeling remained, that sense of being loved completely, protected absolutely. Until the day he died when she was just 5 years old. The official story was that he'd fallen from a cliff during a survey. They'd found his clothes at the base of Eagle Point, blood on the rocks, enough evidence to close the case. Her mother, Amelia, had left town 3 weeks after the funeral, taking young Bren north to stay with relatives who barely knew them. The relatives tolerated them for 2 years before Amelia took sick, pneumonia that turned to something worse, and died in a charity hospital in Spokane. After that, Bren had been shuffled between foster homes until she was old enough to leave, at which point she'd returned to the only place that felt like truth, the mountains above Sagebrush Gulch, where her father had worked. She'd never intended to come back down. The town held nothing for her but ghosts and bad memories. But 6 months ago, while reinforcing her root cellar, she'd uncovered a metal box buried beneath the floorboards of what had once been her father's workshed. Inside was a journal, water-damaged but legible, filled with survey notes and coordinates. And in the margins, in her father's careful handwriting, were questions that had no answers. Discrepancies in land deeds, notes about EH pressing for closure and LG nervous about timeline, references to something her father had found, something valuable, something dangerous. She'd spent months trying to decode the journal, matching his coordinates to modern maps, trying to understand what he'd discovered. And then she'd seen the notice for the spring auction in Sagebrush Gulch. Among the items listed was a storage box from the old Greaves estate, Luther Greaves, her father's contemporary, dead now for 70 years. The description mentioned carved initials on the lid. Something had pulled at her, an instinct honed by years of trusting her gut in the wilderness. She'd packed her weathered rucksack, saddled Copper, her aging mule who'd been her companion for 12 years, and made the day-long journey down the mountain. The town had changed in 30 years, sprawling out along the highway with new construction and fresh paint, but the core remained the same. Main Street still ran straight as a rifle shot from the old bank to the church. The auction house still occupied the converted livery stable at the edge of town. She'd arrived early on auction day, wanting to see the box before bidding began. It sat on a table near the back, ignored by the crowd, focused on furniture and tools and crates of depression glass. The box was roughly 2 feet long, a foot wide, maybe 10 inches deep. The wood was oak, dark with age and split along one corner. The lid hung crooked on rusted hinges, and there, carved into the warped top panel, were the initials J.T. and A. Josiah and Amelia. Her parents, her hands had trembled as she traced the letters. How had a box bearing her parents' initials ended up in Luther Greaves' estate? What was inside? The lid was stuck tight, swollen with moisture and time. But she could see through the crack that something remained within. The auctioneer was a thick-necked man named Owen Mast, 60-something with the practice patter of someone who'd been doing this work for decades. He worked through the lots efficiently, his voice carrying across the crowded room. Bren waited, standing in the back near the door, trying to ignore the glances thrown her way. She knew what she looked like. A tall, angular woman in worn denim and a canvas jacket. Grey hair pulled back in a braid, skin weathered dark by sun and wind. She didn't belong here among the townspeople in their clean clothes and easy laughter. When Owen finally held up the box, his description was dismissive. Lot 47, old storage box, damaged, origin unknown. Let's start at $5. Silence. Nobody wanted it. Come on now, folks. Good solid oak under all that wear. $3? More silence. Then someone in the front row laughed. Who'd want that piece of junk? Owen shrugged. $2 then. Anybody? Bren raised her hand. $10. The room went quiet, then erupted in laughter. She felt the heat of their amusement, the way they turned to look at her, nudging each other and grinning. Owen's eyebrows rose. $10 for lot 47. Do I hear 12? More laughter. Someone called out, "Let the mountain lady have her kindling." Owen waited the required time, then brought down his gavel. Sold for $10 to the lady in back. The laughter followed her as she paid, as she carried the box out to where Copper waited patiently at the hitching post. She loaded the box into her pack frame carefully, securing it with rope, ignoring the comments drifting from the auction house doorway. More money than sense. That one. 30 years up in those hills turns your brain funny. Remember her daddy? Crazy surveyor who walked off a cliff. She climbed into Copper's saddle, adjusting her weight, preparing for the ride back. But something made her pause. She'd planned to return to the mountain immediately, to examine the box in private. Instead, she found herself guiding Copper down Main Street toward the old Miller homestead at the edge of town. The property had been abandoned for 20 years. The house collapsed into its foundation, but the barn still stood. And the land backed up against Bureau of Land Management territory, where she could camp legally. She set up her tent in the lee of the barn as the sun dropped behind the western peaks, built a small fire, made coffee in her battered pot, and then, with the care of someone defusing a bomb, she began working the box's swollen lid free. It took an hour of patient effort, working a thin blade into the crack, applying pressure gradually so the old wood wouldn't split further. When the lid finally gave way, she sat back and took a breath before looking inside. Papers, photographs, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, and carved into the inside of the lid, hidden from view until now, Josiah and Amelia, 1951, the year her father died, or was supposed to have died. She lifted out the first photograph carefully. The image was sepia-toned, brittle with age. 4 men stood in front of a building she recognized as the old Sagebrush Gulch Bank. They were young, maybe in their 30s, dressed in the style of the early 50s, work pants and suspenders, hats pushed back on their heads. They looked confident, prosperous, like men who knew their place in the world. She recognized her father immediately, even though she'd been so young when he died. Josiah Talmadge stood second from the left, taller than the others, with the same angular build she'd inherited. Next to him was a man she didn't know, thick-shouldered and grinning. Third was someone who looked familiar, though she couldn't place him. And on the far right stood a man whose face she recognized from campaign posters she'd seen coming into town. Edmund Harlow, grandfather of the current mayor. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, JTLGOME. Age, last survey 1950. LG had to be Luther Greaves. OM she didn't know. But EH was clearly Edmund Harlow. Her father had known these men, worked with them. And somehow this box had ended up hidden in Luther Greaves's estate for 70 years. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond her fire. Bren's hand moved instinctively to the hunting knife on her belt. Living alone in the mountains taught you to trust your instincts, and right now those instincts screamed that she wasn't alone. Quite a find you made today. The voice came from near the barn, cultured and deliberate. A woman stepped into the firelight, late 70s, well-dressed in wool pants and a cardigan, white hair styled in careful waves. She carried herself with the bearing of someone used to deference. Bren relaxed slightly, but kept her hand near her knife. "And you are?" "Lillian Greaves. This was my father's box you bought today. Then you should have bid on it. I didn't know it existed until I saw it at the auction. My father's estate was settled decades ago, but apparently the executor missed a few things stored in the attic." Lillian moved closer, her eyes on the photograph in Bren's hand. "May I?" Bren considered, then handed it over. Lillian studied it in the firelight, and something flickered across her face, recognition, perhaps, or pain. "That's my father," Lillian said quietly, pointing to the thick-shouldered man. "Luther Greaves. He was the bank manager. Died of a heart attack in 1952. She looked at Bren. "And that's your father, isn't it?" "Josiah Talmadge. You knew him?" "I was young, but I remember. He used to bring you to town sometimes. You'd sit on the bank steps eating penny candy while he did business inside." Lillian handed back the photograph. "I also remember the day they said he died. My father locked himself in his study for 3 days afterward. Wouldn't eat. Barely spoke. My mother thought he'd lose his mind." "Why?" Lillian's eyes met hers, and in them Bren saw something unexpected. Guilt. Not personal guilt, but the inherited kind. The burden of knowing your parent did something unforgivable. "That's not my story to tell. But I'll give you advice, Ms. Talmadge. Whatever's in that box, whatever you're looking for, be careful. There are people in this town with long memories and deep pockets. Stirring up old troubles can be dangerous. Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. From someone who knows what it's like to grow up in the shadow of secrets." Lillian turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About your father." About all of it. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Bren alone with the box and its mysteries. In the distance, a coyote called, and Copper stamped nervously at his picket line. Bren added wood to the fire and settled in to examine the rest of the box's contents. Whatever she'd stumbled into, there was no turning back now. The past had waited 70 years to tell its story. She intended to listen. Bren spent the next morning carefully cataloguing the box's contents. She'd learned patience in the mountains, where rushing meant mistakes, and mistakes could mean death. Each item deserved attention, context, understanding. The oilcloth bundle contained more photographs, these more personal. Her mother as a young woman, standing in front of a house Bren didn't recognize. Her father and mother together, his arm around her waist, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. And one of young Bren herself, maybe 4 years old, sitting on her father's shoulders, tiny hands gripping his hair. She didn't remember the moment, but seeing it made her chest ache with loss. Beneath the photographs were papers, survey reports in her father's methodical handwriting, land descriptions with precise measurements, maps with hand-drawn annotations. She spread them out on a flat rock near her tent, weighing down the corners with stones, and began trying to piece together their meaning. One survey, dated November 1950, caught her attention. It described a parcel of land north of town, currently owned, according to her father's notes, by the Talmadge family as part of an original land grant from the railroad. The measurements were precise, the topography detailed. But in the margins, her father had written, "Underground structure, natural or man-made. EH wants immediate report. Samples suggest significant mineral content. Need time to verify before disclosure." Her pulse quickened. Her father had found something on Talmadge land, something valuable, and Edmund Harlow had been pressing for information. She pulled out her phone, grateful for the signal booster she'd installed on Copper's pack frame. A quick search confirmed what she suspected. The land her father had surveyed was now owned by Harlow Construction, had been for decades. The company headquarters sat on that exact parcel, and according to recent news articles, they were planning a major expansion of their mining operations in the area. Talmadge land, now owned by the Harlows. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidence. She was studying another survey map when she heard the sound of someone approaching through the brush. Heavy footsteps, careless and loud, not Lillian's measured tread. This was someone who didn't care about being heard. A young man emerged from the tree line, maybe 25, wearing stable hand clothes and leading a horse that looked like it belonged in the auction house. He stopped when he saw her, his expression shifting from determined to uncertain. "Ms. Talmadge." "That's right. I'm Tommy Marsh. I work at the stables in town." He hesitated, glancing back over his shoulder. "I shouldn't be here. Mr. Harlow, the mayor, he told everyone to stay away from you. Said you were trouble making false claims about the past. And yet here you are." "Yeah," Tommy squared his shoulders. A gesture that reminded her of young men trying to find courage they weren't sure they possessed. "My grandfather worked for your father back in the day. Did surveys with him sometimes. Before he died, he told me if I ever heard the name Talmadge, I should pay attention. Said there were things about this town that needed to be set right." Bren studied him. Trust didn't come easily after 30 years alone, but something in the young man's face, an earnestness, a desire to do right, even when it cost him, reminded her of her father. "What do you want, Tommy?" "To help, if you'll let me." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "And to give you this. Found it slipped under the stable office door this morning. No name, but I think it was meant for you." She took the paper and unfolded it. The message was brief, written in block letters with a ballpoint pen. "Be careful, they're watching. Check the town records, 1950 to 1952, missing pages." "Who's they?" Tommy shook his head. "I don't know for sure. But the mayor's got people who do things for him. Russell Kane, private investigator. Couple of construction workers who handle problems. My boss at the stables mentioned you yesterday, said the mayor wanted to know where you were staying, what you were doing." "Why are you telling me this?" "You could lose your job." "Already did. Mr. Harlow fired me this morning. Said I was seen talking to you at the auction, that I couldn't be trusted." Tommy's jaw tightened. "I've lived in Sagebrush Gulch my whole life, Ms. Talmadge. I've watched powerful people get away with whatever they want because everyone's too scared or too comfortable to question them. My grandfather said your father was an honest man who died because of that dishonesty. If that's true, then somebody should stand up and say so." Before Bren could respond, she heard another sound, the crack of a branch, the scrape of boot on stone. Multiple people moving through the woods around her camp. Tommy heard it too, his hand dropping instinctively to his belt where a work knife hung. "Get behind me," Bren said quietly, her own knife already in her hand. 30 years in the mountains had taught her more than surveying. Two men emerged from different directions, moving with the practiced coordination of people used to working together. Both wore construction company jackets with the Harlow logo. Both had the look of men hired for their size and willingness to intimidate rather than their skill with hammers and nails. "Ms. Talmadge," the larger one said, his tone artificially friendly. "Mr. Harlow asked us to deliver a message." "I'm listening. He thinks there's been a misunderstanding." "That box you bought. It contains private family property that shouldn't have been in the auction. He's prepared to offer you $500 for it. Generous payment for a $10 purchase. Tell Mr. Harlow the box isn't for sale." The man's smile tightened. "He thought you might say that. Here's the thing, ma'am. That box and whatever's in it, it's causing talk around town, bad talk. People getting upset about old history that doesn't matter anymore. Mr. Harlow thinks it would be better for everyone if that talk stopped, if you took the money and went back to your mountain." "What I think is that your Mr. Harlow is nervous about something," Bren said evenly. And that makes me curious about why. The second man, who'd been silent until now, stepped forward. Curiosity can be dangerous out here, ma'am. Lots of ways a person can get hurt. Accidents happen. Is that a threat? It's a fact. These old homesteads, they're not safe. Rotten boards, unstable structures. Would hate to see you get injured. Tommy moved forward, his young face flushed with anger. You can't... Easy, son, Bren said, putting a hand on his arm. She looked at the two men, her expression calm but her eyes hard. You go back and tell Vincent Harlow that I appreciate his concern for my safety. Tell him I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. And tell him that trying to buy or frighten me away from something just makes me more determined to understand it. You understand? The larger man's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. You're making a mistake. Not the first time. Won't be the last. They left, crashing through the brush with less subtlety than they'd arrived with. Tommy let out a breath he'd been holding. You know they'll be back. I know. Bren looked at the box, at the papers spread on the rock, at the photograph of 4 men standing in front of a bank 70 years ago. Which means I need to work faster. That note mentioned town records. Can you get me into the county clerk's office? It's public record. Anyone can look. Then let's go look. Before they decide to make the records less public. She packed the box's contents carefully, securing everything in waterproof bags. Whatever she'd stumbled into, it was bigger than a simple auction purchase. Someone was frightened enough to send threats. Someone wanted the past to stay buried. That alone told her the past was worth digging up. They rode into town an hour later, Bren on Copper and Tommy on his stable horse. The clerk's office occupied the basement of the county courthouse, a cool stone room lined with filing cabinets and shelves of leather-bound ledgers. The clerk was a woman in her 50s who eyed Bren with obvious recognition and less obvious sympathy. Looking for something specific? Land records, 1950 to 1952, particularly anything related to the Talmadge family or Harlow construction. The clerk's expression shifted. Just a flicker. But Bren caught it. Fear. Let me check what we have. She disappeared into the back room. Bren and Tommy waited, the silence broken only by the tick of a wall clock and the distant sound of voices from upstairs. When the clerk returned, she carried a single ledger. This is 1949 to 1953. Should have what you need. Bren opened it on the reading table, Tommy looking over her shoulder. She found 1950 easily, began working through the entries. Land sales, transfers, grants, each documented in careful script with dates and signatures and filing numbers. January 1951, February 1951, March 1951. Then, nothing. The pages for April through December were gone, removed so carefully that only someone looking closely would notice the stub of paper left in the binding. Someone's cut out 7 months of records, Tommy said quietly. Bren turned to the clerk. Do you have copies? Backups. Everything before 1960 was destroyed in the fire. What fire? County storage facility. 1985 lost a lot of historical records. Convenient, the clerk's face hardened. I just work here, Ms. Talmadge. I don't make the history. I just record it. They left the courthouse with more questions than answers. Someone had removed specific records and then ensured no copies existed. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to erase whatever happened in 1951. As they reached their horses, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a man in his 50s with iron-grey hair and sharp eyes that assessed Bren with professional interest. Ms. Talmadge, Russell Kane. I work for the mayor. Mind if we talk? About being careful. About understanding that some things, once they're disturbed, can't be put back the way they were. Kane's expression wasn't hostile, just tired. I've been doing this work a long time. I know determination when I see it. But I also know when someone's walking into something bigger than they understand, then help me understand it. Kane was quiet for a moment, then said, I can't. But I'll tell you this, powerful men get nervous when the past comes knocking, and nervous, powerful men make dangerous decisions. Watch yourself. He drove away. leaving Bren standing on the courthouse steps with a fired stable hand, a stolen box, and a mystery that people had spent 70 years trying to keep buried. Whatever the truth was, it was time to bring it into the light. That night, Bren spread her father's survey journal on her sleeping bag and read it by lantern light. She glanced through it before, but now she studied each page with the attention it deserved, looking for patterns, connections, anything that might explain why people were so desperate to keep its contents hidden. The journal covered 3 years of work, from 1948 to 1951. Most entries were routine, boundary surveys, property assessments, elevation measurements. Her father's handwriting was precise and methodical, the notes of a man who took pride in accuracy. But as she moved into 1950, the entries changed. The handwriting remained steady, but the content grew cryptic. March 15, 1950, surveyed northern parcel of Talmadge Grant. EH requested detailed topographical analysis. Noted unusual rock formations at north edge. Core samples suggest the entry ended there, incomplete. The next one was dated 2 weeks later. March 29, 1950, returned to site with better equipment. Underground structure confirmed. Natural cave system possibly enlarged. Discovered evidence of previous excavation, old timber supports, rusted equipment. Appears abandoned for decades. EH extremely interested. Wants exclusive report before filing official survey. Bren paused, rereading that last line. Her father had found something on Talmadge family land. Not just a cave, but one that had been worked before, possibly for mining. And Edmund Harlow had wanted the information kept private. She turned the page. The entries grew more detailed, describing measurements and mineral content. Words like significant ore deposits and commercial viability appeared frequently. Then in May 1950 came an entry that made her sit up straighter. May 12, 1950, met with E. Shares LG and OM at bank. They propose partnership. Want to develop the site immediately. Offered to purchase Talmadge land for $2,000. I expressed concerns about valuation. If mineral deposits are as rich as samples suggest, property worth considerably more. EH became agitated. Said offer was generous, the delay would be costly for all involved. LG mentioned property taxes in arrears. Suggested sale would be practical solution. Don't like being pressured. $2,000 for land that might contain a fortune in mineral deposits. Even in 1950, that was an insultingly low offer. Her father had recognized it as such. Tommy had stayed at her camp, reluctant to leave her alone after the confrontation with Harlow's men. He sat across the fire now, whittling a piece of pine with his work knife, watching the tree line. Find anything useful? He asked. My father discovered mineral deposits on family land. Edmund Harlow tried to buy it cheap. My father refused. Bren looked up from the journal. 3 months later, he was dead. Tommy's knife paused mid-stroke. You think they killed him? I think the timing is suspicious. And I think the missing records from 1951 probably show exactly what happened to the land after his death. How do we prove it? We find someone who was there, someone old enough to remember. Bren closed the journal carefully. Tomorrow, I'm going to visit Percy Donovan, the guy at Sunset Haven, the nursing home. He's 91. According to Lillian Greaves, he was deputy county clerk in the 50s. If anyone knows what happened to those records, it's him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling, copper making contented sounds at his picket line. Bren had spent so many years alone that she'd forgotten how companionship could ease the weight of difficult work. Tommy reminded her of her father in some ways. That same quiet determination, that willingness to stand up even when standing was dangerous. Can I ask you something? Tommy said eventually. Go ahead. Why now? You've been up in those mountains for 30 years. Why come down now to dig into this? Bren considered the question. Found my father's journal 6 months ago, buried under the old work shed. Spent months reading it, trying to understand what it meant. Then I saw the auction notice, saw that box was from the Greaves estate. Something told me it was connected. That maybe after all these years, I could finally understand what happened to my father. To my mother, she poked at the fire with a stick. 30 years is a long time to live with ghosts, Tommy. Sometimes you reach a point where you need answers more than you need peace. What if the answers are worse than not knowing? Then at least I'll know the truth. That's worth something. The next morning, they rode into town early before the heat could settle into the valley. Sunset Haven sat on a hill overlooking Sagebrush Gulch, a modern facility trying hard to look welcoming with its flower gardens and covered porches. Bren tied Copper to a tree in the parking lot, ignoring the stares from staff and visitors who seemed startled by the sight of someone arriving on a mule. Percy Donovan occupied a room on the second floor with a view of the mountains. Bren found him in a wheelchair by the window, a blanket over his knees, despite the warm morning. His face was deeply lined, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but his eyes were sharp and clear when they focused on her. "You're Josiah's girl," he said without preamble.
Got his height.
His jawline, too. You remember him? I remember everything, Miss Talmadge. Curse of a good memory is you can't forget the things you wish you could. He gestured at the chair beside him. Sit down. Tell me why you're here. Bren sat, Tommy standing respectfully by the door. She pulled out the photograph of the 4 men in front of the bank. Percy took it with shaking hands, stared at it for a long moment. We were all so young then. Thought we had the world figured out. He touched each face with one finger. Josiah, Luther, Owen Sr., Edmund. The last time we were all together like this was 2 weeks before. He stopped, his jaw working. Before my father died? Percy's eyes met hers, and in them she saw guilt that had been carried for 7 decades. Before they killed him. Or tried to. The room seemed to contract around those words. Bren kept her voice steady. Tried to? Edmund Harlow wanted that land. Your family's land. Wanted it bad enough to do terrible things. I was there when they planned it, Miss Talmadge. Deputy Clerk sees everything that comes through the office. Sees the documents that get filed and the ones that get buried. I knew what they were doing, and I was too afraid to stop it. What exactly did they do? Percy handed back the photograph. Your father found gold on Talmadge land. Not a huge strike, but enough to make a man rich. Edmund offered to buy the land cheap, but Josiah wasn't foolish. He knew what he'd found was valuable. So Edmund got Luther and Owen involved. Luther handled the money. Owen owned the construction company that could develop the mine. They forged a land transfer document, paid off the right people, made it look like Josiah had sold the land voluntarily. But my father was alive. He could have contested it. That's why they had to get rid of him. Edmund hired men, thugs from out of town, to stage an accident. Supposed to look like a fall from Eagle Point? Percy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But something went wrong. Or went right, depending on how you look at it. Someone warned Josiah. He ran before they could kill him. Bren felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. My father didn't die in 1951? He did eventually. Just not the way the official story says. But that's not my secret to tell. What I can tell you is that I was a coward. I let them forge documents. Let them steal your family's land. Let them chase your father out of town and your mother with him. I've lived with that shame for 70 years. He looked at her directly, his old eyes clear despite the tears gathering in them. I'm sorry, Miss Talmadge. I'm so deeply sorry. Tommy had moved closer, his face pale. Where's the land now? The original Talmadge property? Same place it's always been. Harlow Construction built their headquarters right on top of the mine entrance. Been operating it quietly for decades, small scale, so nobody asked questions. But recently, Percy hesitated, recently I heard they're planning a major expansion. New equipment, bigger operation. If there's any evidence left of what they did, of what really happened, they'll destroy it when they start that expansion. Bren stood, her mind racing. The missing records from 1951. Do you know where they are? Percy's expression shifted. Guilt mixed with something else. Relief, perhaps. The relief of finally unburdening a secret. I cut them out myself. The pages showing the forged land transfer. I couldn't stop what they were doing, but I couldn't let that forgery stand as official record either. Kept those pages for 70 years, hidden in my effects. Figured someday someone would ask the right questions. He wheeled himself to his bedside table, opened the bottom drawer with effort. My lawyer has them now. sealed envelope with instructions to open them if anyone named Talmadge ever came asking. That would be you. He handed her a business card. Tell him Percy sent you. Tell him it's time. Bren took the card, her hand steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. What's on those pages? It'll tear this town apart. The Harlows have been powerful for 3 generations on the back of stolen land. People won't want to believe it. They'll fight you. Let them. Bren looked at Tommy, who nodded. I didn't come down from those mountains to make friends. I came for the truth, Percy smiled faintly. You really are Josiah's daughter. He was the most stubborn man I ever knew. Looks like it runs in the family. They left him there by the window, looking out at the mountains where Bren's father had once walked, had once discovered something that would cost him everything. She had more pieces of the puzzle now, but the picture they formed was darker than she'd imagined. Her father hadn't just been murdered. He'd been erased. His land stolen, his reputation destroyed, his family scattered to the wind. All for gold that Edmund Harlow and his partners had mined for 70 years. The past wasn't just buried. It was buried on purpose, deep and deliberate, by people who believed they'd gotten away with it. Time to prove them wrong. That afternoon, while Tommy rode to Red Bluff to meet with Percy's lawyer, Bren returned to her camp and continued examining the box. She'd been through most of its contents, but something told her there was more. The box felt too light for solid oak, and when she tapped the sides, one panel sounded hollow. She worked carefully with her knife, feeling along the seams until she found a hidden catch. The false bottom released with a soft click, revealing a shallow compartment lined with faded velvet. Inside lay a tarnished silver locket on a delicate chain. Her hands trembled as she lifted it free. The locket was heart-shaped, the kind of jewelry a man might give his wife. She pressed the tiny clasp and it opened, the hinges stiff but functional. Inside was a photograph, so small she had to squint to make it out, of herself as a young child, maybe 4 or 5 years old. Her hair was in pigtails, and she was laughing at something beyond the camera's reach. Beside the photograph, carefully preserved in the other half of the locket, was a lock of hair. Child's hair, fine and light brown. Her hair. The discovery broke something inside her that had been holding firm for 30 years. She sat on the ground beside the box and wept, the locket clutched in her fist, grief pouring out in waves that shook her whole body. Her mother had kept this, had hidden it in this box with her father's name carved alongside hers, had preserved this tiny piece of her daughter before leaving, before disappearing into poverty and death and a grave Bren had never been able to find. Copper wandered over and nuzzled her shoulder, his warm breath familiar and comforting. She pressed her face against his neck and let herself remember, not the absent mother who'd vanished, but the one from before, the woman who'd sung while washing dishes, who'd braided Bren's hair with patient fingers, who'd held her tight the day they left Sagebrush Gulch, whispering, "Mama has to keep you safe, baby." I have to keep you safe. Safe from what? From whom? Had her mother known the men who'd tried to kill her father? Had she fled not just from grief but from danger? By the time Tommy returned, Bren had composed herself, though her eyes remained red-rimmed. He dismounted quickly, excitement evident in his movements. Percy's lawyer had the envelope. "Look at this." He spread papers on the flat rock where Bren had been working. They were old, the edges yellowed and brittle, but the text was clear. Land transfer documents dated May 1951, showing Josiah Talmadge selling 160 acres to Edmund Harlow for $2,000. The signature looked right at first glance, until you compared it to other documents Bren had in her father's journal. "The loops are wrong," she said, pointing. "My father made his J's with a distinctive hook. This one's rounded. And look at the date, May 15, 1951. But according to the official story, my father died on May 3rd. How could he sign a document 2 weeks after he was dead? He couldn't, which means this is proof of forgery. It's proof of fraud. But without my father alive to testify, can we prove he didn't sign it before his supposed death?" Bren studied the document more closely. "We need more. We need something that connects the forgery directly to the Harlows. Something that shows intent." Tommy pulled out his phone. "I took photos of everything. Thought we could show them to someone who knows document authentication. Good thinking. But first, I want to see the land. The actual property where my father made his discovery. That's Harlow Construction Headquarters. Private property. They've got security. Then we'll go at dawn, before security's awake. They broke camp before first light, moving through the darkness with the confidence of people who knew how to navigate without streetlights. Bren had spent 30 years reading terrain by starlight and moonshadow. The approach to Harlow construction property was easy by comparison. The headquarters sat at the base of a low hill, a sprawling complex of offices and warehouses surrounded by a chain-link fence. Security lights illuminated the main buildings, but the northern edge of the property, where it backed against undeveloped land, was dark. Bren and Tommy approached from that direction, moving low and quiet. Using her father's survey coordinates and journal descriptions, Bren navigated to where the mine entrance should be. They found it behind the newest warehouse, a concrete structure that looked less than 5 years old. The original mine entrance had been covered with modern construction, but earth doesn't lie. The subtle depression in the ground, the change in vegetation, the way water had eroded the soil, all of it pointed to the underground structure her father had discovered. "This is it," Bren said quietly. "This is where it all started." She was photographing the site when Tommy touched her arm. "Someone's coming!" They flattened against the warehouse wall as a figure emerged from the shadows. Not a security guard, but a man in his 60s wearing work clothes and carrying what looked like a thermos. He walked directly to where they stood, then stopped, his face visible in the ambient light from the distant buildings. "Owen Mast, the auctioneer. Thought I might find you here," he said quietly. "Saw you and the boy scouting the fence line earlier." Bren's hand moved to her knife. "You're going to call security?" "No, I'm going to tell you what my father told me before he drank himself to death." Owen sat heavily on a concrete parking stop, suddenly looking much older than his years. "My father was Owen Mast Sr. He's in that photograph with your father. He helped Edmund Harlow steal your family's land, and it ate him alive until the day he died." Tommy moved closer. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because I'm tired of carrying my father's guilt. Because I found his letters after he died, letters to my mother, to the priest, to anyone who'd listen, confessing what they'd done. But he never had the courage to confess publicly, never tried to make it right." Owen looked at Bren. "I've made my living in this town on the back of what my father helped steal. I've got a house, a business, grandchildren who think their grandfather was an honest man. But I'm not him. I won't die with this on my conscience." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a key card. "This will get you into the old storage facility on Maple Street. Building 7, Unit 23. That's where they keep the archived company records. Everything from the early days, back when my father was part of the business. If there's evidence of what they did, contracts, payments, anything, it'll be there." Bren took the key card. "Why not just go to the police yourself?" "Because I'm a coward, Miss Talmadge. Same as my father. But I'm trying to be less of one. The card's good for 48 hours before they cycle the codes. After that, you're on your own." He stood, joints creaking. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." "I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." He walked away into the darkness, leaving them with access to what might be the final piece of the puzzle. Back at camp, as the sun rose over the eastern mountains, Bren made her decision. "Tonight. We go tonight. What if we get caught?" "Then we get caught. But at least we'll know the truth." She looked at the locket she'd transferred to her pocket, feeling its weight against her heart. "My mother spent years running from what these people did. My father died alone because of their greed. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I'm going to find out exactly what they took from my family, and then I'm going to make them answer for it." Tommy nodded slowly. "Okay, but we do it smart. In and out, document everything, leave no trace." They spent the day preparing. Tommy bought a small camera with night vision capability. Bren studied maps of the storage facility layout. They planned their route in, their route out, contingencies for if things went wrong. As evening approached, Lillian Greaves returned to the camp. She looked older somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. "About my father. About what he did." Bren gestured to a seat by the fire. "I'm listening. My father helped steal your family's land. He processed the forged documents through the bank, made the financial arrangements look legitimate. He was the respectable face on a criminal enterprise." Lillian's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "After your father's supposed death, after your mother fled, my father started drinking. Not heavily at first, but steadily day after day. He'd sit in his study at night with a bottle and your father's file, reading it over and over. My mother thought he was working. I know now he was trying to find a way to live with what he'd done. Did he succeed? He died of a heart attack at 56. The doctor said it was natural causes. I think it was guilt. I think carrying that secret killed him as surely as a bullet would have." She looked at Bren directly. "I'm telling you this because you need to understand the men who did this, they didn't get away clean. They paid for it, every one of them. Edmund Harlow became paranoid in his old age, convinced someone would expose him. Owen Sr. destroyed himself with alcohol. My father worked himself to death trying to atone. Only Edmund died satisfied, and he was wrong. Because here you are." She reached into her bag and pulled out a leather-bound book. "This is my father's personal diary. He kept it hidden from everyone, even my mother. I found it after she died, when I was cleaning out the house. It has dates, details, things he couldn't live with but couldn't confess. Take it, use it. Maybe if the truth comes out, all those tortured souls can finally rest." Bren accepted the diary, feeling its weight. "Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm just trying to clean up my father's mess." Lillian stood to leave, then paused. "Be careful tonight. Whatever you're planning, and I know you're planning something, be careful. The Harlows have more to lose now than Edmund ever did. They'll fight harder to keep the secret." After she left, Bren opened the diary. The entries were sporadic, written in a shaky hand that suggested they'd been made late at night, possibly while drinking. But the content was clear. Names, dates, amounts. A complete record of the conspiracy, written by one of the conspirators. It was more than they'd hoped for, more than they needed. But Bren still wanted the company records, wanted every piece of evidence, every proof, every document that would make the truth undeniable. As darkness fell, she and Tommy prepared to break into the storage facility. The key card felt light in her pocket, a small piece of plastic that might unlock 70 years of secrets. "You ready?" Tommy asked. Bren looked at the mountains where she'd spent 30 years hiding from the world. Then she looked at the town where her father had died and her mother had fled, and the truth had been buried under concrete and lies. "I'm ready." They headed into the night. Two people against a conspiracy that had lasted 3 generations. The odds didn't matter. The danger didn't matter. Truth had its own weight, its own momentum, and once it started moving, nothing could stop it. Not money, not power, not 70 years of silence. The truth was coming, and Sagebrush Gulch would have to face it. The storage facility sat on the edge of town, a collection of corrugated metal buildings surrounded by inadequate lighting and minimal security. Owen's keycard worked perfectly, the electronic lock clicking open with a soft beep that seemed too loud in the quiet night. Building 7 was at the back of the complex, older than the others, its door marked with faded paint. Unit 23 was halfway down a dim corridor that smelled of dust and old paper. Tommy swept his flashlight across the walls, checking for cameras, but found none. The facility was designed to keep thieves out, not to monitor what people did once they were inside. The unit door wasn't locked. Apparently, the building's security was considered sufficient. Bren pushed it open carefully, half expecting an alarm, but nothing sounded. Inside were rows of metal shelving stacked with boxes, filing cabinets with dates scrawled on masking tape labels, and the accumulated debris of decades of business operations. "Where do we start?" Tommy whispered, though there was no one to hear them. 1950 and 1951. Anything with those dates. Bren moved to the nearest shelving unit. "Look for contracts, financial records, correspondence. Anything that mentions Talmadge, Greaves, or Harlow. They worked systematically, Tommy photographing while Bren sorted through documents. Most of it was mundane: payroll records, equipment purchases, routine business correspondence. But in a filing cabinet marked 1948-1952, buried under 3 years of quarterly reports, she found what they'd come for: a contract agreement, dated March 1951, between Edmund Harlow, Luther Greaves, and Owen Mass Sr. The document was typed on official letterhead, signed by all 3 men, and notarized by a clerk whose name Bren didn't recognize. The heading read, "Partnership Agreement for Development of Mineral Resources, Talmadge Property." Bren read it twice, her pulse quickening. The agreement laid out terms for exploiting mineral deposits on land, described by the exact coordinates her father had surveyed. It specified profit sharing, operational control, and timeline for development. And it was dated 2 months before the forged land transfer, before her father had supposedly sold the property to Edmund Harlow. They made a deal to mine land they didn't own, Tommy said, reading over her shoulder. Then they stole the land to make the deal legal. Photograph every page, multiple angles. While Tommy worked, Bren continued searching. She found more. Payment ledgers showing monthly transfers to someone named J. Hendricks Consulting. The amounts were substantial, hundreds of dollars at a time, which in 1951 represented serious money. A note in the margin in Edmund Harlow's handwriting read, "Final payment upon completion." Hendricks, Bren muttered. "That name mean anything to you?" Tommy shook his head. "Should it?" Before she could answer, they heard voices outside the building. Male voices, casual and unhurried, but definitely approaching. Bren killed her flashlight immediately, and Tommy did the same. "Told me to check the old units tonight," one voice was saying. "Said someone might try to access them. Seems like a waste of time." "Who'd want this old junk?" "Just doing what I'm paid for, man." The voices were moving down the corridor toward them. Bren grabbed Tommy's arm and pulled him behind a tall filing cabinet in the back corner of the unit. They pressed against the wall, barely breathing, as flashlight beams swept through the open door. Unit 23, that's the one he mentioned. A guard, or security, or whoever the Harlows had sent, entered the unit. His flashlight played across the shelves, the boxes, the disturbed dust that showed someone had been searching through the files. Bren's hand moved to her knife. She wouldn't use it unless absolutely necessary, but she wouldn't be caught either. "Looks like someone's been through here," the first guard said. "Recently?" "Hard to tell. Could be from earlier today when maintenance was doing inventory." They stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute, their light sweeping the small space. Then a radio crackled. "Unit 17 needs checking. Motion sensor tripped." "Copy that." "We'll head that way." The guards left, their footsteps receding down the corridor. Bren and Tommy waited in silence for 5 full minutes before moving. When they finally did, Bren's legs were stiff and her heart was still racing. "We need to finish and get out," she whispered. They worked faster now, photographing everything relevant they could find. More contracts, more payment records, a letter from Edmund Harlow to Luther Greaves discussing the surveyor problem and necessary measures. Another letter mentioning Owen Mast's construction crew being available for special work. The picture was complete, damning, undeniable. The 3 men had conspired to steal Talmadge land, had planned her father's murder, and had profited from their crime for decades. The evidence was here, preserved by the very arrogance that made them believe they'd never be caught. They were nearly finished when Bren found one more item, a brass survey. Marker with USGS 1951 stamped into its surface and J. Talmadge engraved on the side. "Her father's marker removed from the site and hidden here like a trophy. Take it," Tommy urged. "It's yours." Bren slipped it into her pocket alongside her mother's locket. Physical evidence tied directly to her father's work, proving he'd been there, proving the land had been his to survey. They left the storage facility carefully, checking for guards before emerging into the night. The walk back to camp felt surreal, like moving through a dream where everything was both familiar and strange. They had what they needed. They had proof. But Bren felt no triumph, only a bone-deep weariness and a growing certainty that the hardest part was still to come. Back at camp, they downloaded the photographs to Tommy's laptop and then to 3 separate thumb drives, one for Bren, one for Tommy, and one they'd mail to Tommy's cousin in Red Bluff as backup. Trust was good, but redundancy was better. Dawn was breaking when they finally finished. Bren sat by the dying fire, exhausted but unable to sleep. The survey marker was warm in her hand, the brass catching the early light. She thought about her father holding this same marker, placing it in the ground to mark his work, never knowing it would become evidence in a case against his murderers. Tommy dozed against a tree, the laptop still open beside him. He'd been awake for over 24 hours, but he'd never complained, never suggested they stop or slow down. Loyalty like that was rare. Trust like that was precious. Bren made a mental note to ensure he was protected when this all came out, to make sure his courage didn't cost him more than he could afford. Around mid-morning, Lillian returned. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her usually careful appearance disheveled, her eyes red. "They know," she said without preamble. "The storage facility manager called the mayor's office this morning. Someone accessed Unit 23 last night. They're reviewing security footage now. The cameras weren't working in that building. Doesn't matter. They know someone was there, and they know what's in that unit. Vincent Harlow is calling an emergency town council meeting this afternoon. The subject is addressing false historical claims that could damage town reputation." Lillian's expression was grim. "He's going to try to discredit you publicly before you can present your evidence." Bren stood, her decision made. "Then I'll attend the meeting. I'll present the evidence there in front of the whole town. Bren, they'll destroy you. Vincent has lawyers, influence, decades of respectability. You're a woman who lives on a mountain with no witnesses, no credentials, no standing in this community. I have the truth. That's enough, is it?" Lillian's voice was sharp with fear and frustration. "Truth without power is just noise. Vincent will paint you as a troubled woman with delusions, someone trying to extort money from a respected family business. He'll have half the town believing him before you even open your mouth. Then I'll make sure the other half hears me." Bren met her eyes. "I appreciate your concern, but I didn't come this far to back down now. If the mayor wants to face me publicly, let him. I welcome it." Lillian was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You really are your father's daughter? Stubborn to the bone." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Then take this. Record everything at the meeting. If they try to silence you or edit what happened later, you'll have proof of what was actually said." After Lillian left, Tommy woke and stretched. "What did I miss?" "Town council meeting at 4 this afternoon. We're going to lay it all out. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence we've found. You sure about this? Once you go public, there's no taking it back." Bren looked at the mountains rising in the distance, at the town spread below them, at the box that had started everything. "I've been taking back what they stole for 2 weeks now. Time to finish it." They spent the afternoon preparing. Bren organized the evidence chronologically, creating a narrative that even someone with no background could follow. Tommy created a digital presentation, scanning documents and photographs into a format that could be projected for the whole room to see. They rehearsed what she would say, how she would respond to challenges, what points she absolutely needed to make. By 3 o'clock, Bren had changed into her cleanest clothes, still worn and practical, but presentable. She braided her hair carefully, the way her mother used to do it. She put her father's survey marker in one pocket and her mother's locket in the other, physical reminders of why this mattered. Tommy loaded their evidence onto his laptop and a backup drive. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." They rode into town as the sun angled toward late afternoon, the light turning everything gold. People stared as they passed, word having spread that something significant was happening. The town council chamber in the courthouse basement was already filling when they arrived. Not just council members, but townspeople, business owners, curious spectators drawn by gossip and the promise of drama. Mayor Vincent Harlow stood near the front. conferring with a man in an expensive suit who had to be his lawyer. He looked up as Bren entered, and their eyes met across the room. His expression was confident, dismissive, the look of a man who'd already won and was just waiting for his opponent to realize it. Bren took a seat in the back, Tommy beside her with the laptop ready. Percy Donovan was wheeled in by a nurse, taking a position near the side wall where he could see everything. Owen Mast sat in the middle section, his face carefully neutral. Russell Kane, the private investigator, stood against the back wall, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The council president, a round-faced woman named Margaret, called the meeting to order at precisely 4 o'clock. "We have an unusual item on today's agenda," she began. "Mayor Harlow has requested time to address certain rumors circulating about town history and property ownership." "Mayor?" Vincent Harlow stood, his posture relaxed, his smile warm and practiced. He was in his late 50s, fit and well-dressed, every inch the successful businessman and civic leader. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the chamber. "Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate the council's time today. I'm here to address what I can only describe as a troubling situation, one that has the potential to damage not just my family's reputation, but the reputation and economic stability of Sagebrush Gulch itself." He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. "In recent days, a woman named Bren Talmadge has arrived in town, making wild accusations about events that allegedly occurred over 70 years ago. She claims, without credible evidence, that my grandfather Edmund Harlow conspired to steal land from her family. She suggests fraud, forgery, even murder. These are serious allegations, and they deserve serious examination." Another pause. Bren kept her expression neutral, waiting. "The facts are simple. In 1951, Josiah Talmadge, Ms. Talmadge's father, sold a parcel of land to my grandfather for a fair price. The transaction was legal, properly documented, and filed with the county. Tragically, shortly after the sale, Mr. Talmadge died in a surveying accident. It's a sad story, but not an uncommon one in that era. Men worked in dangerous conditions. Accidents happened." Vincent's expression shifted to something approximating sympathy. "I understand Ms. Talmadge's desire to romanticize her father's death, to find meaning or conspiracy where there was only tragedy. Grief does strange things to people, but we cannot allow personal delusions to undermine the foundations of our community. Harlow Construction has provided hundreds of jobs over 3 generations. We've built schools, sponsored community programs, supported this town in countless ways. To suggest that our success is based on theft is not just false, it's deeply offensive." A few people in the audience nodded. Bren felt the room's sympathy tilting toward the mayor. "Exactly as Lillian had predicted, so I'm here today to set the record straight, and to ask that Ms. Talmadge cease her harassment and false accusations. If she has legitimate grievances, there are proper legal channels to pursue them. But spreading rumors and making wild claims helps no one." He looked directly at Bren. "I'm even prepared to offer assistance if Ms. Talmadge needs support. Mental health resources, perhaps, or financial help to return to her home. No one wants to see her continue down this destructive path." The implication was clear. She was mentally unstable, possibly dangerous, certainly not credible. The room's energy had shifted completely. Bren could feel people's eyes on her, their judgment forming before she'd said a single word. Margaret looked uncomfortable. "Does Miss Talmadge wish to respond?" Bren stood slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze. This was the moment. Everything they'd found, everything they'd risked, came down to the next few minutes. "I do wish to respond," Bren said quietly, moving to the front of the room. Tommy followed with the laptop, setting it up on the presentation table. "And I appreciate the mayor's concern for my mental health, though I assure everyone here that I'm quite sound of mind." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. Vincent's smile tightened slightly. "Mayor Harlow says the facts are simple. I agree. So let me present them." She nodded to Tommy, who brought up the first image, the photograph of the 4 men in front of the bank. This is my father, Josiah Talmadge, with Luther Greaves, Owen Mass Sr. and Edmund Harlow in 1950. 1 year before my father's supposed death, the image filled the screen, clear and undeniable. She heard murmurs from the audience. My father was a surveyor. In March 1950, he was hired to survey land that had belonged to the Talmadge family since the 1870s, a railroad land grant, properly documented and legally sound. During that survey, he discovered significant mineral deposits. Gold specifically. She brought up the next image, pages from her father's journal. These are his survey notes. He documented everything carefully, as was his practice. He also documented something else. Pressure from Edmund Harlow to sell the land for far less than it was worth. More images. The journal entries describing the lowball offer. Her father's concerns, the increasingly aggressive meetings. My father refused to sell. He knew what he'd found was valuable, and he knew his family's land was worth far more than $2,000. So Edmund Harlow, Luther Greaves, and Owen Mass Sr. formed a partnership. She brought up the contract agreement, dated March 1951, to develop mineral resources on land they didn't own. The room had gone very quiet. Even Vincent Harlow's confident expression had begun to crack. 2 months later, they forged a land transfer document. She displayed the forged deed alongside examples of her father's genuine signature. Note the differences in the signature. The loops, the pressure points, the letter formation, all wrong. And note the date, May 15th, 1951. According to official records, my father died on May 3rd, 1951. How does a dead man sign a document 2 weeks after his death? Someone in the audience gasped. Vincent stood abruptly. This is absurd speculation based on documents that could have been falsified by anyone. Then you won't mind these, Bren said calmly, bringing up the payment ledgers. Financial records from Harlow Construction showing monthly payments to someone named J. Hendricks, labeled as consulting fees. The final payment note says, upon completion. Completion of what, Mayor Harlow? Vincent's lawyer stood now, his voice sharp. My client doesn't have to answer baseless insinuations. They're not baseless. Percy Donovan's voice, weak but clear, cut through the rising noise. All eyes turned to the old man in his wheelchair. I was deputy county clerk in 1951. I witnessed the forgery. I helped cover it up. His hands shook on the wheelchair arms. I'm sorry, Vincent. Sorry to your father and your grandfather. But I can't let the lie continue. The room erupted. Margaret banged her gavel frantically, calling for order. Vincent's face had gone red, then pale. His lawyer was trying to speak over the noise, but no one was listening. Bren waited for the chaos to subside, then continued. Percy Donovan removed the original forged documents from county records to prevent them from standing as official record. He gave them to his lawyer with instructions to release them if anyone named Talmadge ever came asking questions. I have those documents. I have my father's journal. I have the partnership agreement showing premeditation. And I have this. She pulled the brass survey marker from her pocket, holding it up so the light caught the engraving. My father's survey marker. It was hidden in Harlow Construction's storage facility, along with all the other evidence of what they did. Owen Mast stood then, his face pale but determined. She's telling the truth. My father was part of it. He confessed to my mother in letters I found after his death. He helped Edmund Harlow and Luther Greaves steal that land. He helped cover up what they did to Josiah Talmadge. And his voice broke. I've known for years and said nothing. I'm sorry, Miss Talmadge. I'm deeply sorry. The room had gone from chaotic to utterly silent. People stared at Owen, at Percy, at the evidence displayed on the screen. Vincent Harlow stood frozen, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Lillian Greaves stood from her seat. My father was Luther Greaves. He was the bank manager who processed the forged documents. He lived with that guilt until it killed him. Before he died, he kept a diary. She pulled out the leather-bound book. Every detail of the conspiracy is in here. Every name, every date, every payment. He couldn't live with the lie, so he documented the truth. She walked to the front and handed the diary to Margaret, the council president. This belongs to the public record now. Let everyone see what was done in this town's name. Margaret took the diary with shaking hands, her face ashen. She looked at Vincent Harlow. "Mayor, I think you need to—" "This is a coordinated attack," Vincent said, his voice strained. "These people have conspired to destroy my family's reputation with fabricated evidence and coached testimony." "I wasn't coached," Percy said firmly. "I've carried this shame for 70 years. Time it came out? Neither was I," Owen added. "I've been a coward long enough." Tommy stood holding up his phone. "And I've been recording this entire meeting. Every word. So there's no question later about what was said or by whom." Russell Kane, who'd been silent until now, moved forward from his position against the wall. "I'm a licensed document examiner. I've worked in forensics for 25 years. If the council wishes, I'm willing to provide professional authentication of these documents." "Pro bono." Vincent's lawyer grabbed his arm, pulling him aside for an urgent consultation. The mayor's confidence had completely evaporated. He looked like a man watching his world collapse in real time. Margaret looked at the other council members, who nodded slightly. "I think we need to adjourn this meeting and reconvene with legal counsel present. The allegations being made here are serious enough to warrant a full investigation." She banged her gavel. "Meeting adjourned. Mayor Harlow, I suggest you make yourself available for questioning." People began talking all at once, voices rising in shock and anger and disbelief. Some directed their fury at Vincent Harlow, others at the revelation that their town's prosperity had been built on theft and murder. A few approached Bren, wanting to shake her hand or offer apologies or simply understand what it all meant. Vincent Harlow pushed through the crowd toward the exit, his lawyer close behind. But before he could leave, Bren stepped into his path. "This isn't over," she said quietly, "for his ears only. You're going to make this right. You're going to acknowledge what your grandfather did, and you're going to provide restitution for what was stolen." "You have no proof anyone was murdered," Vincent hissed. "All you've proven is a disputed land transfer from 70 years ago. Maybe it was forged, maybe it wasn't. That's a civil matter at best. Then let's make it a civil matter. I'll see you in court, Mayor, and I'll see you lose everything your family built on stolen ground." His eyes hardened. "You have no idea what you've done. This town depends on Harlow construction. Hundreds of jobs, millions in revenue. You'd destroy all that for what? Revenge for a father you barely remember? Justice. There's a difference." She stepped aside, letting him pass. "And I remember him perfectly, after the crowd dispersed." Bren found herself standing in the empty chamber with Tommy, Percy, Owen, and Lillian, unlikely allies bound together by truth-telling and shared guilt. "What happens now?" Tommy asked. "Now we wait," Percy said. "The council will investigate. The state attorney general's office will get involved. Vincent will fight, but he's fighting a losing battle. Too many witnesses. Too much evidence." "He mentioned the mine expansion," Bren said. "Construction starts soon. If there's any physical evidence left at the site, anything that proves what they did to my father, it'll be destroyed once they start digging." Owen straightened. "I can help with that. I know the construction schedule. Know which areas they're planning to excavate first. If there's something there to find, we should look now before it's too late." "It's Harlow property," Lillian warned. "You'd be trespassing. Wouldn't be the first time this week," Bren said dryly. "When do they start construction?" 3 weeks. But they're doing preliminary surveying next week. That's when they'll be most focused on the expansion area." Bren looked at the faces around her, old and young, guilty and angry, all of them committed now to seeing this through. "Then we have 3 weeks to find whatever's left to find. 3 weeks to finish what my father started 70 years ago." They filed out of the courthouse into the evening air. The town looked the same as it had that morning. Same buildings, same streets, same mountains rising in the distance. But something fundamental had shifted. Truth had been spoken. Secrets had been exposed. The comfortable lies that had sustained Sagebrush Gulch for 3 generations had cracked wide open, and through that crack, finally, the light could get in. 24 years of her father being alive in the world while she'd thought him dead. 24 years of missed chances, lost time, A relationship that could have existed but never did because of fear and secrecy and the long shadow of violence that Edmund Harlow had cast over all their lives. She looked at the mountains in the distance, at the town below, at the evidence of conspiracy and theft and murder they'd uncovered. It had all seemed so clear before: expose the crime, demand justice, reclaim the land. But now it was bigger than that. It wasn't just about what had been stolen. It was about what could have been and never was. About a father and daughter who should have known each other, should have shared decades together, but were kept apart by the greed of men who'd valued profit over human life. "I'm going to read every one of these letters," Bren said quietly. "I'm going to learn everything I can about the man my father became after he left. And then I'm going to make sure that Vincent Harlow and everyone in this town understands the full cost of what his grandfather did. Not just the theft of land, the theft of a life, of a family, of years that can never be recovered." She looked at Lillian and Tommy, at the growing coalition of people willing to stand with her. "This isn't about money anymore. It's about making sure my father's story is told completely, truthfully, so that everyone understands what was really lost, so that what happened to him never happens to anyone else." The sun had fully risen now, bright and clear, illuminating the path ahead. Bren Talmadge had come down from the mountains seeking answers. She'd found them, but the answers had revealed a deeper truth, a more profound loss, and a more complex path to justice than she'd ever imagined. The real work was just beginning. Bren spent the next 3 days reading every letter her father had written to Luther Greaves. She read them chronologically, watching her father's voice emerge from the pages, measured at first, cautious, then gradually more open as the years passed and the immediacy of danger faded. The early letters from 1952 were brief, written in careful language that revealed little in case they were intercepted. Her father described his work surveying mining claims, the Oregon landscape, the strange loneliness of living under an assumed name. He asked about his daughter, carefully, obliquely, whether she was safe, whether she was happy, whether she remembered him at all. By 1955, the letters had grown longer, more personal. He wrote about the difficulty of hiding who you really were, of answering to a name that wasn't yours, of building a life on a foundation of lies. He'd remarried briefly, he wrote, to a widow who needed a husband more than she needed love. The marriage had lasted 2 years before they'd admitted it was a mistake born of mutual loneliness. "I think of Amelia every day," he wrote in 1957. "Wonder if she thinks of me, if she's found some happiness. I hope she has. I hope she and our girl are somewhere safe and good, living the life we should have had together. That's the worst part of this exile, not the isolation, but knowing they're out there somewhere, alive and unreachable. Like looking at stars that died years ago but still shine." Bren had to stop reading then, her vision blurred with tears. Her mother had died in 1959, just 2 years after that letter. Had her father known? Had Luther told him? She flipped forward through the letters, looking there. A letter from early 1960, the handwriting tight and controlled, the words sparse. "And do you tell me A died last year? That you learned of it through some chain of connections I don't want to know about? That the girl is alone now, passed between relatives who don't want her? I've spent 9 years hiding to protect them, and now there's only one left to protect. Should I try to reach her? Would it be safe? Or would my emergence just bring danger to a child who's already lost too much? I don't know what to do. For the first time since this started, I don't know the right move." J. Luther's response, scrawled in the margin in pencil, was brief. "Stay hidden. Edmund watches everything. Wait." So her father had known her mother was dead, had known Bren was alone and struggling, and had stayed in hiding anyway, choosing her safety over his own desire to be reunited. The knowledge was both comforting and devastating. The letters continued through the 60s and into the 70s. Her father had settled in Millbrook, Oregon, working for various surveying companies, living quietly and carefully. He never mentioned trying to contact Bren directly, but he clearly followed her life from a distance. A letter from 1968 mentioned hearing through channels, that she'd moved to the mountains, that she'd built a cabin and chosen solitude. She inherited my love of high country, he wrote. That gives me some small comfort. At least she found peace, even if she found it alone. The final letter was dated March 1976, written in a shaky hand that suggested illness or pain. L. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 6. Cancer in the lungs, spread to the bones. Strange how a lifetime of outdoor work ends in a hospital room. I wanted to write one last time, to ask one last favor. Tell her someday, if it's safe. Tell her I loved her every day of my life. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't be the father she deserved, but that I tried to be the father she needed, the one who kept her safe from a distance, who chose her security over my own happiness. Tell her the land was never worth what it cost, and if she ever has a chance to reclaim it, she should. Not for revenge, for justice, for the truth. So no one else loses what we lost. J. Morrison, Josiah Talmadge. Bren sat with that letter for a long time, her thumb tracing the words her father had written in what must have been significant pain. He died when she was 30 years old. She'd been in the mountains by then, settled into the life she'd live for the next 3 decades. If he'd reached out then, if he'd sent a letter or made contact, would she have believed him? Would she have welcomed a father she'd thought dead for 25 years? She'd never know. That was the cruelest part, never knowing what could have been if circumstances had been different, if evil men had made better choices, if the world had been fair instead of brutal. Tommy found her that afternoon still holding the letter, her face set with a determination he'd come to recognize. "We need to go to Oregon," she said, to Millbrook. "I need to see where he lived, where he died. I need to visit his grave. Bren, the town council hearing is in 5 days. The state investigator arrives tomorrow to review evidence. This is when we need you here, not in Oregon. I know, but I need to do this first. Need to understand the full story before I face Vincent Harlow again." She looked at him. "My father spent 25 years in exile because of what Edmund Harlow did. I'm not going to reclaim his land without first honoring his memory properly. Will you come with me?" Tommy nodded without hesitation. Of course. They left that evening, driving Tommy's old pickup north toward the Oregon border. The journey took 14 hours, through mountain passes and high desert, arriving in Millbrook just as dawn was breaking over the Cascade Range. Millbrook was small, maybe 3,000 people nestled in timber country, where logging had once been king and now barely survived. They found the county records office easily enough, a modest building that also housed the Library and Historical Society. The clerk was a woman in her 40s who listened to their request with professional courtesy, then genuine interest when Bren explained who she was looking for, J. Morrison. "I'd have to check death records from 1976. She disappeared into a back room, returning with a ledger and a file box. "Here we are. James Morrison died July 15th, 1976, age 57. Cancer. He's buried in Millbrook Cemetery, Section D, Lot 47. Do you have any other records? Employment history, property ownership, anything?" The clerk pulled out a thin file. "Not much. He worked for Mountain States Surveying for about 15 years, then freelanced the last decade. Rented a small house on Pine Street. Never married, no children listed. Kept to himself by all accounts. Quiet man, reliable worker." She paused. "Though there is one odd thing. When he died, he left a letter with his landlord. Instructions to hold it for 20 years, then send it to a specific address if no one claimed it. The 20 years would have been up in 1996. Bren's pulse quickened. "Do you know what address?" "Let me see." The clerk checked the file. "A post office box in Sagebrush Gulch, Nevada. Box 127. The breath went out of Bren's lungs. Her father had written her a letter, had arranged for it to be sent 20 years after his death, giving enough time for danger to pass, but hoping she might still be alive to receive it. Was it sent? According to the notes here, yes. Mailed August 1996. Bren had been in the mountains by then. No permanent address, no post office box. She'd received mail through general delivery when absolutely necessary, but mostly avoided contact with the postal system entirely. The letter would have sat unclaimed, eventually returned or destroyed. Is there any chance it was returned? That anyone kept a copy? The clerk shook her head sympathetically. Not that I can find. I'm sorry. Another loss, another missed connection. But at least now Bren knew her father had tried, had reached out across the years and beyond death itself, hoping to connect with the daughter he'd had to abandon. They found Millbrook Cemetery on the edge of town, a modest plot with simple headstones and ancient pine trees providing shade. Section D was toward the back, the graves older and less maintained. Lot 47 held a plain granite marker with minimal inscription. James Morrison, 1919, 1976, rest in peace. No mention of his real name, his family, the life he'd lived before exile. Just the false identity he'd worn for 25 years. The name of a man who'd never really existed. Bren knelt beside the grave, her hand pressed against the sun-warmed stone. Tommy stood back, giving her space, his head bowed respectfully. "I'm sorry I never knew you," Bren said quietly. "Sorry we never got the chance to be father and daughter as adults, to share stories and time and all the things that were stolen from us. I'm sorry you died alone under a false name, buried here where no one knows who you really were. But I'm going to fix that, Papa. I'm going to reclaim your land, tell your story, make sure everyone knows what was done to you, to us, to our family." She pulled out the brass survey marker she'd found in the Harlow storage facility, the one with her father's initials engraved on its surface. "I'm bringing this home. Back to Sagebrush Gulch, to the land you surveyed, the land they stole. And when I win it back, and I will win it back, I'm going to put up a proper memorial. One that tells the truth, one that uses your real name. Josiah Talmadge, surveyor, father, man of integrity who died too young and too far from home." She stood, her decision made. "I'm also going to establish something in your memory. A foundation, maybe, or a scholarship. Something that helps people who've been displaced by injustice, who've lost their homes or their families to the greed of powerful men. So your death means something. So the years you lost become seeds for something better." Tommy moved closer. "That's a good plan. A good way to honor him. It's not enough. Nothing will ever be enough. But it's what I can do." She looked at the marker one more time, committing the location to memory. "Someday when this is all settled, I'm going to come back. I'm going to have his remains moved to Sagebrush Gulch, if the authorities will allow it, to be buried on the land that should have been his. Or at least I'll put up a memorial there so people know where to find his story." They left Millbrook that afternoon, driving through the same mountains and deserts in reverse, arriving back in Sagebrush Gulch late the next night. The town was quiet, most windows dark, the streets empty. But tomorrow, the state investigator would arrive and the real legal battle would begin. Bren was ready for it now. She'd found all the pieces, the documents, the witnesses, the letters, the grave. She knew the full scope of what had been done and what had been lost. And most importantly, she knew what her father would have wanted her to do, not seek revenge, seek justice, seek truth, and then use that truth to build something better, something that would prevent the same tragedy from happening to others. As she set up her tent at the old campsite, she noticed lights on at the courthouse. Someone working late or perhaps preparing for tomorrow's proceedings. Vincent Harlow, maybe, meeting with lawyers, strategizing how to minimize damage and protect his family's empire. Let him strategize. Let him bring lawyers and money and all the power his family had accumulated over 3 generations. Bren had something more powerful. The truth, spoken by multiple witnesses, documented in letters and ledgers and forged deeds. She had a coalition of people, some guilty, some angry, all committed to seeing justice done. And she had her father's memory driving her forward, his final letter urging her to reclaim what had been stolen, his life of exile giving her the determination never to back down. Tomorrow, the real confrontation would begin. Tomorrow, she'd face Vincent Harlow and the machinery of the establishment and all the forces arrayed against change and accountability. But tonight, She sat by her campfire and read through her father's letters one more time, memorizing his voice, understanding his choices, finding strength in his example. He'd survived 25 years alone, living a lie to protect his daughter. She could survive one more confrontation to honor his truth. The state investigator arrived precisely at 9 in the morning. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Barbara Chen, who'd spent 20 years with the Attorney General's office handling fraud cases. She sat up in the courthouse conference room, surrounded by document boxes and recording equipment, ready to take formal statements. Bren was the first witness. She'd prepared carefully, organizing her presentation to tell the story chronologically, building from her father's initial survey work through the conspiracy, the staged death, and the decades of exile that followed. She spoke clearly and calmly, her mountain-honed composure serving her well. Barbara Chen listened without interruption, taking notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When Bren finished, nearly 2 hours later, the investigator sat back and studied her carefully. "You understand the difficulty here," Chen said. "Your father is deceased. The other principals, Edmund Harlow, Luther Greaves, Owen Mass Sr., all deceased. We're dealing with events from 70 years ago. Witnesses are elderly or gone. Physical evidence is limited. I have documents. You have documents that suggest fraud, yes, but proving it beyond reasonable doubt, that's harder." Chen tapped her pen against her notepad. "The forged signature on the land transfer is your strongest evidence. If we can prove definitively that your father didn't sign it, we can establish fraud. But the date discrepancy you mentioned, that's not as strong as you think. The document could have been signed before his supposed death and filed afterward. It's unusual, but not impossible." Bren felt her stomach tighten. "So you're saying we can't prove anything?" "I'm saying it's complicated. We can likely prove fraud occurred, but connecting it specifically to Vincent Harlow's grandfather, proving a conspiracy to commit murder, that's where it gets difficult." Chen's expression softened slightly. "But here's what I can tell you. The partnership agreement you found, dated before the land transfer, that's premeditation. The payment records to J. Hendricks, that suggests hired help for something irregular. Percy Donovan's testimony, that's an eyewitness to forgery. And Luther Greaves's diary, that's a confession from beyond the grave. So you believe me?" "I believe something criminal happened in 1951, and I believe your family was the victim. Whether we can prosecute anyone today, that's doubtful. Everyone directly involved is dead. But we can pursue civil remedies. We can challenge the current property ownership based on fraudulent transfer. We can seek restitution from the Harlow estate. Over the next 3 days, Chen interviewed everyone. Percy Donovan wheeled into the conference room to repeat his eyewitness account of the forgery. Owen Mast, confessing his father's role and producing the guilt-ridden letters he'd found. Lillian Greaves, presenting her father's diary and the bundle of letters from Josiah Talmadge. Even Russell Kane provided professional authentication of the forged document, pointing out specific anomalies in the signature that proved it wasn't genuine. The evidence mounted, document by document, testimony by testimony. Chen was methodical, thorough, building a case that would withstand scrutiny. She sent documents to forensic handwriting experts in Sacramento. She requested historical property records from the state archives. She traced the chain of ownership from the original Talmadge land grant through the forged transfer to the current Harlow Construction Holdings. Meanwhile, Vincent Harlow fought back. His lawyers filed motions to suppress evidence, claiming the documents from the storage facility had been obtained illegally. They argued that Percy's testimony was unreliable due to his age, that Luther's diary was hearsay, that the whole case was a shakedown by a woman trying to extort money from a legitimate business. The local newspaper, which had initially been sympathetic to Bren, began running editorials questioning whether stirring up ancient history served any useful purpose. Opinion pieces appeared arguing that Harlow Construction's importance to the local economy outweighed historical grievances. A citizens group formed to support local business and held a rally outside the courthouse. Bren watched it all with a mixture of anger and understanding. These people weren't defending corruption. They were defending their livelihoods, their community, their sense of stability. Change was frightening, even when it was just. On the fourth day, Chen called a meeting with all parties. Vincent Harlow arrived with 3 lawyers. Bren came with Tommy and a legal aid attorney who'd volunteered to represent her pro bono after reading about the case. Chen laid out her findings with clinical precision. The evidence strongly suggests the 1951 land transfer was fraudulent. The signature analysis confirms the document was not signed by Josiah Talmadge. The partnership agreement dated before the transfer demonstrates premeditation. The testimony and written confessions from Luther Greaves and Owen Mast Sr. establish a conspiracy. While criminal prosecution is impossible due to the death of the principals, the civil case for fraudulent property transfer is solid. Vincent's lead lawyer, a silver-haired man named Preston, leaned forward. Even if we accept that fraud occurred 70 years ago, which we don't, the statute of limitations has long expired. My client cannot be held responsible for his grandfather's alleged actions. The statute of limitations for fraud doesn't begin until the fraud is discovered, Chen replied. Ms. Talmadge only discovered the truth 2 weeks ago. More importantly, property obtained through fraud can be reclaimed regardless of time elapsed. The land was stolen. It remains stolen property. Preston's jaw tightened. You're talking about property worth millions. Property that's been developed, improved, operated as a legitimate business for 3 generations. Overturning that ownership would have catastrophic consequences. For your client, yes. But that's not my concern. My concern is justice under the law. Chen turned to Vincent directly. Mr. Harlow, I'm recommending the Attorney General file suit to void the 1951 land transfer and return ownership to the Talmadge estate, specifically to Bren Talmadge as sole surviving heir. The room fell silent. Vincent's face had gone pale, then flushed red. You can't be serious. That land has been in my family for 70 years. Stolen property doesn't become legitimate through prolonged possession, Chen said flatly. However, she glanced at Bren, I'm authorized to facilitate a settlement if both parties are willing. Ms. Talmadge, what would you consider fair resolution? Bren had thought about this moment constantly over the past few days. She'd imagined taking everything from the Harlows, watching their empire crumble, seeing Vincent lose what his grandfather had stolen. The revenge fantasy had sustained her through difficult moments, but then she'd think about her father's last letter. About justice, not revenge. About building something better, rather than simply tearing down what existed. I want 3 things, she said slowly. First, public acknowledgement of what happened. A full statement from the Harlow family admitting the fraud, the conspiracy, and my father's forced exile. Not a settlement with non-disclosure. The truth, stated clearly and publicly. Vincent started to object, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm. Second, the land itself returned to Talmadge ownership. Not all of the current Harlow construction property. I understand buildings and improvements have been made, but the original 160 acres that were stolen, minus whatever development has made return, impractical. And the mineral rights to all of it, since that's what this was really about. That's worth, Preston began. I'm not finished. Third, fair compensation for 70 years of illegal mining operations. An independent appraiser can determine what the Harlow family has extracted from land they didn't own. That amount, adjusted for inflation and reasonable interest, paid to the Josiah and Amelia Talmadge Foundation, which I'll establish to support displaced families and historical justice initiatives. She looked directly at Vincent. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges for conspiracy or file wrongful death suits. I won't try to seize other Harlow assets or shut down your business. The mine can continue operating under a proper lease arrangement with fair terms. Your family keeps its wealth and position, diminished but intact. And most importantly, the 200 people who work for you keep their jobs. The room was quiet for a long moment. Preston was scribbling notes furiously, calculating, assessing. Vincent stared at Bren like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Why? He finally asked. Why offer any compromise at all? If you have the evidence to take everything, why settle for less? Because I'm not my enemy's mirror. Your grandfather was willing to destroy lives for profit. I'm not. Bren's voice was steady. I want justice for my family and the truth told. But I don't need to ruin innocent people to get it. Your employees didn't steal anything. The town didn't conspire. They shouldn't pay for crimes they didn't commit. Chen nodded approvingly. Mr. Harlow, I'd advise you to consider this offer seriously. If Ms. Talmadge pursues maximum legal remedies, you could lose everything. This settlement preserves your business while acknowledging historical wrongs. It's more than fair. Preston pulled Vincent into a whispered consultation. Bren could see the calculation happening, weighing pride against pragmatism, reputation against survival. Finally, Vincent pulled away from his lawyer and looked at her. I need time to review the specific terms, to consult with our board, to understand exactly what we're agreeing to. You have 48 hours, Chen said. After that, the Attorney General files suit, and settlement becomes much more difficult. They filed out of the conference room into the courthouse corridor, where reporters had been waiting. Vincent pushed through them without comment, his lawyers forming a protective barrier. But Bren stopped, facing the cameras and microphones that thrust toward her. I'll make a brief statement, she said calmly. My name is Bren Talmadge. My father was Josiah Talmadge, a surveyor who discovered gold on our family's land in 1950. Edmund Harlow, Luther Greaves, and Owen Mast Sr. conspired to steal that land through forgery and attempted murder. My father spent 25 years in exile under a false name, dying alone in Oregon, while the Harlows profited from stolen property. I've presented evidence of this fraud to the state investigator, and we're working toward a resolution that serves justice while protecting innocent workers and community members. That's all I have to say right now. She walked away from the cameras, Tommy beside her, leaving the reporters scrambling to process what she'd said. The story would be everywhere by evening, state news certainly, probably national. The comfortable lies that had sustained Sagebrush Gulch for 70 years were dissolving in the harsh light of truth. 2 days later, Vincent Harlow's answer came. The meeting reconvened in the courthouse conference room, but this time it felt different. Vincent Harlow entered without his usual entourage of lawyers, bringing only Preston and a woman Bren didn't recognize, younger, maybe 40, with Vincent's sharp features and determined expression. This is my daughter, Rachel Harlow, Vincent said stiffly. She's been managing our mining operations for the past 5 years. She'll be taking over as CEO effective immediately. Rachel stepped forward, her handshake firm when she reached Bren. Ms. Talmadge, I've spent the past 2 days reviewing every document, every piece of evidence. I've also read my great-grandfather's personal papers, things my father never showed me. And I've come to a conclusion that might not please everyone in my family. She pulled out a folder, setting it on the conference table. What Edmund Harlow did was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but morally bankrupt. He didn't just steal land. He destroyed lives, tore apart a family, and built our fortune on that destruction. I can't undo what he did, but I can acknowledge it and I can try to make it right. Vincent shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. We accept your terms, Rachel continued. All 3 of them. We'll issue a public statement acknowledging the fraud and conspiracy. We'll return the original 160 acres with mineral rights. We've had surveyors confirm which portions can be legally transferred without disrupting current operations. And we'll pay restitution for 70 years of mineral extraction. She pulled out another document. Our accountants estimate the value extracted from the original Talmadge claim at approximately $8 million in current value, accounting for inflation and market rates. We're prepared to pay that amount to your foundation over 5 years with $1 million initial payment within 30 days. Bren had been expecting a fight, expecting them to contest every point. The ready acceptance caught her off balance. Why? Why accept so quickly? Rachel's expression was complicated. Anger, shame, determination all mixed together. Because my children go to school in this town. They'll grow up knowing their great-great-grandfather was a thief and attempted murderer. I'd rather they also know that when the truth came out, their family did the right thing. That we chose integrity over profit, even when it cost us." She looked at her father. "My father built Harlow Construction into what it is today through legitimate work. He didn't steal anything, but he benefited from theft, and he defended that theft when challenged. That ends now. We're going to operate ethically going forward, even if it means being less profitable than we've been." Vincent finally spoke, his voice quiet. "For what it's worth, Ms. Talmadge, I didn't know. Not the full story. I knew my grandfather had bought land from your father, knew there had been some tragedy, but I didn't know about the forgery, the conspiracy, the attempted murder. My father never told me, and by the time I took over the company, everyone involved was dead. I thought the land was legitimately ours. Did you?" Bren asked. "Or did you choose not to look too closely because you didn't want to know?" Vincent's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "Perhaps. Perhaps I was willfully blind. But I'm seeing clearly now. And I'm sorry. Not just for what my grandfather did, but for how I responded when you first brought evidence. I should have listened. Instead, I tried to silence you, intimidate you, protect a legacy that didn't deserve protecting." He pulled out one more document, this one handwritten, signed, and notarized. "This is my personal statement, my acknowledgement of what happened and my family's responsibility. It will be published in every newspaper in the state, and it will be displayed permanently at our company headquarters, so no one ever forgets what happened when greed overrode integrity." Bren read it carefully. The statement was detailed, unflinching, and honest. It named names, described crimes, and accepted full moral responsibility, even while noting that criminal prosecution was impossible due to the passage of time. It was more than she'd expected, more than she'd dared hope for. "There's one more thing," Rachel said. She pulled out an old leather case, opening it to reveal a collection of papers and photographs. "These were in my great-grandfather's personal safe. I found them when reviewing his papers. They're strong, deep roots. They'll be here long after we're all gone." Percy looked at the memorial with satisfaction. "Your father would be proud of you." "Of all of this?" "I hope so." Bren sat on the bench beside his wheelchair. "I got a letter yesterday from a woman in Oregon who knew my father in his later years. She sent photographs I'd never seen, him at work, him at home, him standing on a mountain overlook looking east." Her voice caught slightly. "Looking toward home." The photo was dated 1975, 1 year before he died. Percy reached over and patted her hand with his gnarled fingers. "He never stopped thinking of you, never stopped hoping. That's love, child. The kind that survives everything, distance, time, even death itself." They sat together in companionable silence as the sun moved across the sky. Other visitors came and went. Owen masked with his grandchildren, teaching them about their family's history and the importance of acknowledging wrong. Lillian grieves with flowers for the memorial, her weekly ritual of honoring the man her father had betrayed. Rachel Harlow with a donation check for the foundation, continuing her family's commitment to restitution. As evening approached, Bren made her way back to her camp, though camp was no longer accurate. She'd built a small cabin on the edge of town, close enough to be part of the community, but far enough to maintain the solitude she'd grown to need. Copper grazed in a small paddock beside the cabin, content in his semi-retirement. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. Her father's pipe still sat on a shelf, now joined by his surveying tools, his letters, his photographs. Her mother's locket hung from a nail by the window, catching the last light of day. The brass survey marker served as a paperweight on her desk. Holding down maps of the land she was slowly learning to call home again. She'd thought, when she first came down from the mountains, that she was seeking answers about the past. She'd found those answers, had uncovered every detail of what had been done to her family. But she'd also found something unexpected, a future. Not the isolated future she'd imagined spending the rest of her days alone in her mountain cabin, but a connected future, surrounded by people who'd become friends. Part of a community that had learned to face its history honestly. Tommy stopped by that evening with dinner from the diner. They'd fallen into an easy routine over the past months. Neither quite family nor quite friends, but something in between that worked for both of them. They ate on the cabin's small porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "So here's a question," Tommy said between bites. "That $10 box. Best investment you ever made?" Bren laughed, a sound that came more easily now than it had in years. "Best and worst. It bought me answers, justice, closure. But it also brought me grief, anger, and knowledge of losses I can never recover. Was it worth it?" She considered the question seriously, looking out at the valley where lights were beginning to appear in windows, at the mountains where she'd spent 30 years hiding, at the town that had finally learned to tell the truth about itself. "Yes," she said finally. "It was worth every moment of pain, every sleepless night, every hard conversation. Because the truth matters, Tommy, not just for me, but for everyone. A town built on lies can never really be at peace. A family separated by secrets can never really heal. And a woman living in isolation from the past can never really live in the present." She pulled out her father's pipe, turned it over in her hands as she'd done countless times before. But this time, the gesture wasn't about grief or loss. It was about connection, memory, and the understanding that love persists, even when everything else is taken away. "My father spent 25 years in exile because he wouldn't compromise his integrity. He died alone under a false name, buried in a stranger's cemetery, believing he'd failed his family. But he didn't fail. He survived. He documented the truth. He waited for justice, and eventually justice came." She looked at Tommy. "Sometimes the things people laugh at carry the weight of everything. And sometimes one woman's quiet dignity is enough to lift that weight and set it right." Tommy raised his water glass in a toast. "To setting things right." "To setting things right," Bren echoed, clinking her glass against his. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Bren felt something she'd rarely experienced in her 58 years: contentment. Not happiness exactly, because the losses were still real and the grief still present. But contentment in knowing she'd done what needed doing, had honored her parents' memory, had brought truth into the light. The broken storage box had cost her $10 at a town auction, where people laughed at the mountain woman's foolish purchase. But it had given her something priceless: her father's story, her family's justice, and a future where she belonged not just to the mountains or the valley, but to both and to the truth that connected them. No one was laughing now. And finally, after 30 years of isolation and 70 years of buried secrets, Bren Talmadge was home.